Well, my only credentials for talking about ecopoetics is that I am a child of rural America, the Arkansas Ozarks, and which, when I was a child, were the wildest and woolliest of mountains, but perhaps for the Appalachian Mountains, especially in West Virginia, where you virtually need an interpreter. But so there's not much to recommend me other than I grew up in one of many rural towns in a 1.5 million acre hardwood forest, the oldest range west of the Mississippi. So what happened as I grew older and started living in cities and different parts of the country, and I love cities and I love to be in different regions, was that what I continued to long and yearn for were very discrete and fully expressed seasons, and especially the trees. And I grew up swimming in green rivers and man-made lakes with 1,000-mile shorelines, and abundance of terrapins and lightning bugs and frogs and butterflies and poisonous snakes and country flowers like hollyhocks and sunflowers, and ticks and chiggers, which we thought would discourage the Yankees from taking over and living like sultans in the cheaper part of the world. So my attachment to the natural world just was second skin. I mean, it was just where I came from. I just wasn't an urban creature. And it's continued to sort of, it's continued to drive me back to the South in many of my sort of explorations of poetry, where I really needed to be around trees and lakes and rivers and green things and living things. And I have watched over the years, very easily observed the degradation of our rural world, not just our cities, and not just caused by factories, but just a disregard for our role here, our function here. And I think I agree with Alan Gilbert, a young critic here, who says that ecopoetics is not a practice per se, it's simply a fact of writing. And what I would say that is at its base is that it is one of the most readily transformative interdisciplinary activities of human expression. It's natural that writers, it's inevitable that writers be involved. And I can think of many writers who are especially, really good examples. I think a Red Start is a good example, but I think of Brenda Hillman's quartet of books that are particularly focused on California ecology. And Merrill Gilfillan, I don't know if you know him, a writer from the Plains, whose prose and poetry and exquisite little drawings on paper bags are just, I think he's just a virtuoso writer about our natural world, and in a very, very subjective way. No attempt to frame it as a political analysis, which it requires also, but just as somebody who's not separated, who does not experience the separation that so many of us now do in our everyday lives. I think of someone like Robert Hass, who's been very dedicated, Juliana Spar, especially under the influence, I would say, of maybe the most perfect, quintessential book of what you might call ecopoetics, which is Inger Christensen's alphabet. Just a perfect little book. I think of a young poet named Andrew Zawacki, Peter O'Leary, whose new book, Phosphorescence of Thought, is from the point of view, if you will, of a wren with an incredible song to sing. Jory Graham's most recent books from Overlord, Sea Change, Place, all of these. So many people have just, it's not the practice so much, it's the content, really. I think it is content driven, and it's driven by some of our most beautiful writers. It's driven by our most language driven and language conscious writers. I would disagree that it has a particular kind of manifesto of poetics per se. That it has to be this way or that way, fractured, I think it's a holistic practice, and I think that we're going to see people from every discipline playing their part in this procession. And it's a matter of urgency, which poetry, even though it's a reflective activity, has always been quite suited to urgency and emergency, I would say. It's the point at which people come most often to poetry. I heard Heather McHugh say the point of love and the point of death is when everyone needs poetry, and it's kind of like we're at that point. We're at the point of love and death of our planet. We're nature. We're it. This is anecdotal. I remember W.S. Merwin telling me about a conversation he had with a very well-known critic who said to him that I didn't mean to even use a gender, that this critic was not particularly interested in nature and all that. And Merwin's response was, "What makes you think you're distinct?" I'm sure he said it very politely in a very courtly way, but I would imagine there was some echo of that. She had to have taken that in now that I've already used her gender. So I think that we're in, an unprecedented state of emergency, and everybody has to participate in that. I have been researching for the last year a book on beech trees, and so mainly on trees in general, and have everything from something like The Miracle of Trees, which looks like a little gift book, but is just rife with information and beautiful engravings, to a book called 10 Billion, a hair-raising book, who the scientist who wrote it asked a younger scientist in his lab what he would tell his children to do in this particular state of emergency. And he said, "I would teach my son to use a gun." Not very comforting response, but there's not a line of comfort in this text, I'm afraid. And I had to read it, but so I've been reading everything from The Miracle of Trees to The Dying of Trees. I did have to resist the book called What is the Worst That Could Happen? I just I couldn't even lay my hand on that one. But this is a rather disjointed thing of saying that I mainly think that this is about all of us, all of our disciplines, all of our passions, all of our curiosity, all of our intellectual interest. All of that has to be brought to bear. And poets seem very suited to this task.